Well, thanks for doing this, Mike. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me on.
You did your time in the minors.
Yes, I worked in baseball for quite some time. 8 of those seasons were spent at the minor league level, and then three I spent as the minor league strength and conditioning coordinator for one organization. So, a total of about 11 years working in various roles and various levels of the minor league baseball system.
You went to Colorado State for your bachelor's, is that right? Fort
Correct.
Collins?
Yep.
You're from Colorado, I assume?
Yeah, not native, but spent the majority of my developmental years here. So pretty much went to Colorado State for school. Obviously left for a number of years traveling around small town USA in baseball. And then when I got out of baseball, wanted to move back to Colorado because that felt most like home. And, I love it here.
Did you play baseball in college or high school?
No, just high school. I was one of those athletes that was, good at all sports, excellent at none. So, the the sports ended at high school, but it definitely led into my choice of career where, when I got to college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was essentially, I loved training, I loved sports. And so I wanted to find a way to make a career out of it. And so I chose exercise science for my bachelor's degree, pursued that. And then kind of through an internship is what led to my connection into getting into professional baseball relatively quick after graduating.
Yeah, it seemed like you went right into that after graduating. What was the internship with? Who was it with?
So, Athletes Performance, which now known as
Got it.
Exos, I
Yep.
was out at their location in Carson, California, which was awesome. Got exposure to working with some NFL combine athletes at the beginning. And then once the combine was over, shifted over to the baseball group. And that's where I uh, started to realize that I felt like that was kind of more the area that I wanted to pursue. And they had some connections and reached out on my behalf, and kind of the rest is history.
I think I actually went to a mentorship in Carson. Is that the place that's co-located with like the soccer field?
Right. So the Home Depot Center, they've got tennis courts, soccer courts. They host all kinds of events all year round, which was cool to see some of the stuff come in while I was out there for a few months. With at the time, like the Galaxy were just getting up and running or were relatively new, and so there was a lot of buzz around that. And like I said, tennis events, and there's a university that's close to there too. So we saw a lot of their collegiate athletes come through.
What did you think about the athlete's performance system?
I liked it. I mean, for a young strength coach that knew nothing, right? So everything was textbook, and one of the things I wish I had done more back then was volunteer or get involved in some kind of role with the sports teams there at Colorado State. But I was very novice, very green, didn't know a thing. And so what they were able to provide was, a system or, kind of some, I guess, background and, a form for us to kind of work through while also getting guidance from the career professional that was working with that group. And so they did I think, a really good job of, once the comfort level was there, to give interns the opportunity to get in the mix and coach and learn and lead. And that was something that I really, really valued. So I feel fortunate to have gotten the opportunity to get an internship and spend time there.
I spent a week there for, I think, a mentorship. I think it was a week. It's called a mentorship.
Hmm.
And I came away from there not learning anything about their programming. And I'm pretty sure the guy who's teaching it didn't know how they programmed.
Wow.
If they did program, because all he'd bring up is like this spreadsheet, and he like, click down, and it would kind of give him, but when I asked him details about it, so I came away from there thinking that these coaches are just implementing training someone else has designed, and because they really kind of go deep into explaining the programming. Did I miss something, or maybe I was just stupid?
Well, who know? I mean, yeah, I don't know as far as your experience. Like, again, I was an intern, right? So some of
Yeah.
the ins and outs of how they actually came about their programming, I wasn't necessarily involved in because of being in an intern role. But as I learned more after leaving that, it's very, I would say, kind of FMS based. Like, you're going to see a lot of single leg stuff, a lot of chops and lifts, and it's all great stuff. But I think, yeah, I guess I could see how, maybe from I guess a proprietary standpoint, their methods or something we're only allowed to see to a certain degree behind the curtain. But like I said, from my experience, again, in the role that I was therefore it was a great jumping off point for me, and I took a lot out of it.
Did you take some of that stuff to the minor league teams, coaching for them, or did you just put it in the bag and never come back to it?
I think they're all tools, right, in your tool set, and so a lot of it did go with that, but I also kept an open mind going into like a 2-week internship I did on my own dime to go get some experience with the Diamondbacks organization before I went back to Colorado to graduate. And so just trying to be a sponge and all the ins and outs or whatever I could glean from the coordinator there at the time and the other staff members was, okay, how do things operate in the sport that I want to work in? What do I need to know? And then asking for guidance on, hey, what do I need to do to get a position next year, and what can I do to set myself up to be a good candidate for a role come the next competitive season. So I definitely took some of that with me. Like I said, it was exposure to a lot of different things that in my own training, in my own knowledge at that time was completely new. And so I gravitated towards that, implemented it where it was appropriate within my own training. And that's really how I like to learn, is actually taking methods and applying them to my own training to see what it feels like. And then, of course, when I did get into baseball in my first full-time season was, again, just kind of learning. My first organization was the Arizona Diamondbacks. And so it was learning their philosophy and their methods and just how things operated, working in a team setting where we play every single day. So we have to train and compete on the same day. And what does that look like? And so that's kind of where it started for me. And like I said, I feel very blessed to have gotten the opportunities that I did, and I took full advantage, or at least tried to.
Do you still use the FMS in your coaching with firefighters and police?
A little bit, to a degree. I use it for our entry screening. So we do it entry and exit, just because for me, I think
This is
it's
for the academy, like the
correct.
academy?
Yeah.
Skip
Yeah.
that.
We don't do it with all our personnel here in the city of Aurora. We have over 1,000 first responders. So I'm obviously not, screening all of them. So I think there's some value there to where we can just highlight some areas that may need improvement across the board from like a class perspective. But I will say that as my career has gone on, I use it less and less, just because in general, it's kind of the same things that we see over and over again. Plus, you're within your own coaching, within the sessions, you can see things in more of an organic way, I guess, is identify some of those limitations and then figuring out how to address them via progressions or regressions in real time.
Yeah, I actually flew down to Tucson, went to Gray Cook, taught his own FMS course down there, drunk the Kool-Aid, bought a couple of expensive kits, tried it out, thought it was amazing, and probably in 2 months I discarded everything. And
Why?
well, and then I took a closer look at the research because at the event that I was at, he did a couple things. One was he referenced a study of like 600 or 800 OCS candidates and claimed that the FMS was a predictor of injury in OCS. And another thing was he did something called the toe touch complex. And the idea was that you would squeeze a ball between your legs and it would activate your lower abdominal muscles and allow your hamstrings to relax. And at the end of the toe touch complex, this guy was able to get, it was just like a bend over, touch your toes exercise. And he's able to do a lot more. It's like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And then in my own practice, I tried to implement the idea of flexibility and movement patterns or relearning the movement patterns. And I was just having no luck with it. And then I went back and took a look at the study you referenced, and a much better predictor of injury for that OCS class was their incoming gait fitness assessment. In other words, the fitter they were, the much less chance they had to get injured.
Right.
Rather than their movement pattern. And I actually wrote an essay called The Tyranny of the FMS. It's for whatever reason, it got adopted, and the science on it is really sketchy right now in terms of being a predictor of injury rates, is what it was sold at that time.
Right.
So it's interesting, but I do understand the link between him and Verstegen and Boyle, especially him and Verstegen in terms of the FMS. And how they use it for their sports performance. So I call that, I guess, in my own mind, that whole area of strength conditioning programming, sports performance, more for team sports. But it is interesting to see how it's developed over the years. I don't know if X's use it as much anymore. I imagine they do, but it was just interesting seeing not only those coaches work, but that facility, how they ran that facility. At that time, they had Kaiser machines in there. You know what the Kaiser machines are? You know, they use air pressure for
Oh yeah, yeah.
loading, and they were kind of using the velocity paced, stuff based on before they had the velocity gizmos that they do now for velocity training. It was interesting to see that side of it for sure. And those coaches were all studs. I mean, they were all like ex athletes, college collegiate athletes, and they were all really strong, and really fit themselves. That was interesting. I did learn some stuff about work capacity programming. They were all. I'm sure you were there at that time. We actually did a VO2 max, and it was heart rate based work capacity programming. And they would have us do shuttle sprints. And if your heart rate got below where they wanted you to be, you had to start making cuts quicker and quicker. So just that little tool is that if you want to increase the intensity of shuttle sprints, shorten the distance of the shuttle sprint, make more cuts, because essentially you got to slow down and then come out of the hole, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had I don't know if they do now, but they had Versa climbers in there, and Versa climbers were a big part of their work capacity programming. I'd never seen a Versa climber before, but I mean, we were doing like 10-second intervals on Versa climber, like three of us, and all getting smoked.
Yeah, yeah.
The 10-second interval. Tell me about, I mean, you mentioned going to and working for the baseball teams and the minor leagues. I was going to ask you about, I mean, is there an off season? Aren't those guys like playing almost year round or pretty close? I mean, the MLB season is incredibly long. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just one thing I wanted to touch on, like especially with the kind of on the FMS topic too, is like
Go
it's
ahead. Yeah.
to your point of like making claims about injury, a prediction and numbers and stuff like that. Like it's not necessarily how I view it either. But ultimately, like especially as a private company now, a part of what our services are is evaluation, right? And that goes back to movement and obviously your physical fitness. And I would agree that, the findings is that the more physically fit you are, then the lesser chance of you actually being injured. However, like from a movement perspective, I feel like we need to have something. And so sometimes we modify that. It may not be like a full FMS, or we'll even make up our own kind of things, but essentially is like, how do they do in some kind of single leg stance? If we're looking at their squat pattern, generally speaking, what's their trunk stability or control look like? Do we have something to just, again, kind of globally evaluate their shoulder ranges? And then based off of that, like, where do we kind of sit as a group or as a class or as an individual? And so it's not necessarily using the FMS and all the FMS breakouts or the exercises that they recommend. It's just that's a small screening tool to give me a general idea of who's coming into an academy, because they're all coming from different walks of life and different fitness ages and stuff like that. And so that just gives me a little bit of a picture. And then once we do our version of an OPAT, is once we go through that physical, now we kind of have those two areas to go, okay, these are the things that we need to work on as an academy moving forward, at least in the first phase or the first month or so.
Do you actually use any of that data to modify the strength conditioning programming for the academy?
So what I'll do is after I collect all that information is, again, I'll put it into class averages, and go basically, hey, as a class, this particular group, may have lower scores in one particular area. So when it comes to like our active recovery or perhaps the active rest in between our working sets, what kind of stuff are we sprinkling in there to address some of these issues? Which, again, it may not necessarily be an FMS exercise. It may be other tools or methods that I've been exposed to and have had success with. And so we mix those in. And then at the end of the academy, we will retest again just to kind of see like, hey, how'd we do? But ultimately, like you said, like your general fitness capacity is what's going to be probably the highest indicator of success from a physical perspective and staying healthy throughout the academy.
Let's go ahead and stay on the academy. Pat, is that the I forget that acronym. Is
So
that your gate assessment coming in
yeah,
for the
it's just like
academy?
an occupational performance assessment.
Got it. And what is it for the city of Aurora? It's probably different for the firemen and is it the CPAP for the firemen or something different?
Yeah, so both agencies have their own test that candidate will have to complete as part of the application process.
Got it.
I am not a part of that. So that takes place before I see these individuals. What we
Got
did
it.
as performance code is essentially put together, our list of tests or evaluations that kind of cover the full spectrum of physical attributes, very much in line with like the ACFT, if you're familiar with that, but just like very basic, simple things that can be executed easily with large groups and perhaps relatively novice individuals when it comes to,
So
again,
do you
their
do a
fitness age.
gate fitness assessment for both academies?
So, yeah, our tests of what we do is we basically will have them go through a trap bar deadlift. They'll do,
Be specific. The specifics are interesting. So what
yeah.
is your is it the same for both police and firemen or is it different?
So I will use the same test for both our
Okay.
police and fire academies. And so the way that I describe it is it's basically like our Aurora public safety performance evaluation. And so what we'll use is a trap bar deadlift, and then we'll do pull-ups.
Is that what is that, a 3 RM, a 1 RM? What is it?
What's interesting is I actually started with a 3 RM, in theoretically a safer movement or rep scheme perhaps, but actually what I found is it was actually more troublesome where, our recruits perhaps didn't make the right weight selection where rep 1 or 2 looked pretty good, but it was actually the second or third rep that actually, may have been a little bit questionable. And so I said, you know what, like, I'm just going to try and move it to a 1 rep max. Now, of course, I preface this when we test them that, like, if you happen to know what your all-time PR is, your lifetime PR for this, like, we don't necessarily need to hit or exceed that mark. I want a challenging, heavy single for whatever it is that you have today, to obviously, account for different levels of fatigue and readiness. And so we go through that, and I make sure that, we take them through a proper warm up and try to explain kind of the loading scheme for how to appropriately get to
You're
a
talking
heavy single.
to the choir here. I love 1 RM. So
Yeah.
go
Good. Yeah.
ahead. Yeah, yeah. I'm not. I don't agree with the safety argument and all that crap. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, and to be honest, we've had less issues doing it that way. And by the way, I should preface it by saying that we do our performance testing usually in the week 4 or 5 of the academy. So it gives me 3 weeks to train them, have them get some exposure to some of these movements before we go into this.
Oh, so it's not a gate. It's a mid. How long is the academy? Like 8 weeks or something, or is it
But
longer?
no, so it varies on the fire side, but typically what we've seen is it could be anywhere. The shortest that we've worked with a different department was 13 weeks, and the longest we've had was 27 weeks. I've currently got a fire academy right now that is 34 weeks, but the first 10 weeks are all EMT training. So the full fire academy itself is about 22 weeks. With police, because of the state regulations, it's run almost more like a college course where so many credit hours go towards different disciplines that it's always 26 weeks for our police academies. And so knowing that, usually, like I said, we try to give them at least a month to kind of get their feet under them, gives me an opportunity to really coach them up, understand where they're at, and make the best decision about, okay, are we ready to actually kind of truly evaluate where we're at? So, the argument may be that there's some improvement that happens there in those 3 to 4 weeks, and maybe it's not, but I'm okay with that. Like that it doesn't really matter that much to me. I'd rather be safe. Trap bar, deadlift, again, for what I call it a heavy single instead of a 1 rep max. For some people, that just seems to work for them mentally, of like how to do it appropriately. And then we'll do pull-ups, strict pull-ups. We'll also do push-ups on a metronome. So that one's kind of a twofer for us, where we're obviously evaluating their horizontal press, muscular endurance, but also that's like our trunk stability or like our core stability test. So
What
because
what
the
is the what's the metronome pace that you use?
80 beats per minute.
And they just go to failure, or they
Mm-hmm.
can't make the beat. Or
Yeah. Yeah. So, they're allowed to miss the cadence once. They get an opportunity to get back on pace. And then if they're unable to, or if their form breaks, again, with like their trunk control, then the test is complete.
so 80 beats per minute, is that like they got to go down and up on every beat?
No, so it's slower. So basically, it would basically be like top, bottom, top, bottom,
Oh, so
top,
they're at the top
bottom
for
with a
one
click.
beat and bottom at another one. They come up. So they got to like pause at the bottom a little bit. Okay,
A little bit,
that's killer.
or yeah, it's like a continuous test, right? So like someone that could easily rep out, I don't know, 50 reps in a minute or what have you, is probably around like a 35-ish range on a metronome test.
Right, right. Got
And
it.
that's
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I like it, instead of trying to come up with like, do we do a plank test for 3 minutes? Like, is there value in that? I don't know. To me, not really. So that one's kind of, again, that's kind of a two part for me as far as the evaluation goes. And then we also do vertical jump tests. So that's kind of like our total body power expression.
It's
And
just one of those stick things you hit.
yep, yeah, the old Vertex. And then the final test, that's a part of that battery. We just use the multi-stage fitness test.
So that's a beep test.
Correct. Yeah.
Got it. No, no, like 1.5 mile run or anything.
No, I think they used it in the past, but again, for me, it was a way to control the environment a little bit more, especially like with facilities and what we have access to. I don't want to get them out off site or off location at a high school running around a track and coordinating all that. What we have here from a facilities standpoint is we've got some flat surfaces that are the appropriate distance that we can safely run an entire group at the same time. I have eyes on them at all times, and so for us it was just a more efficient evaluation of their general cardiovascular fitness or their anaerobic capacity.
How often are you getting these candidates for an hour in the morning every day, 5 days a week, or how often are you getting them?
So with fire, I get them every morning. And our current schedule is we are basically a 4-day schedule. They'll go Monday, Tuesday, off on Wednesdays, and then back on Thursday, Friday.
Got
Police,
it.
again, like I mentioned, because of our um, peace officer safety regulations through the state, is that they are only required to hit 26 hours of wellness. We are tripling that here in the city of Aurora, usually on a good week, and it doesn't always work this way, but usually I'll get to see them 3 times a week, which obviously, I want them every day, but it's just the way it is. It's very, very detailed and very, I guess, more structured, whereas fire doesn't have those restrictions, and so we have a little bit more freedom to work with. But one of the ways that we kind of make up for that is we'll almost microdose little sessions with the police group in the afternoon. So they might come out and just do a 10-minute, 20-minute something or other. And so from our perspective, that it's one way that we kind of work around those hurdles to try and get more exposure to these things for these individuals, because they're Gen Pop, like, and they have the same, challenges that you would find doing personal training, at a chain gym.
Yeah, the I was going to ask you, just in terms of your fitness assessment, has that evolved, or is that the one you kind of developed initially, and it's gone ahead and endured, other than going to 1RM on the trap bar?
Yeah, we did. There's some other things that changed. Like I said, when I first started, and when I moved away from baseball into the tactical space, it was a rather unplanned move for me. And we could chat about that later in a second. But when I moved, it was okay. I'm in this new environment, and was trying to just get a feel for what are the best practices and what's to operate. And so I very much looked at the ACFT and what the Army was doing. I basically tried to research whatever I could to see if there's, things that are backed by research, or, what we could find. And along with that was, okay, if I just created my own evaluation, what matters most to me? Like, okay, I want to evaluate their total body strength. I want to evaluate upper body push and pull. Okay. Cardiovascular fitness and power. Okay. What's the easiest way to go about doing that? and the most efficient way to go about doing that with potentially large groups of up to 50 individuals, and I'm one coach. So what do we do there? And that's really how that was the main rationale for why we settled on those things. But for example, we used to use a med ball overhead toss as our power test. But what I found was, due to facilities and weather and size of the groups, is that we didn't get a whole lot of opportunities to actually practice that or train that particular thing, throwing med balls, all that much. And so I was like, I don't know if that really is going to, give us the information that we're looking for or hoping to evaluate. Plus, there's it can be pretty challenging from a coordinative standpoint for a lot of individuals that are relatively, deconditioned or haven't trained much. And so
Yeah,
I
I know.
felt,
I'm critical of that in the ACFT.
yeah, and so that's why I moved to the vertical jump. I feel like it's just generally more intuitive for most people. Like, see it, go get it, like jump and get it, and it is what it is. And so that was one thing. Those are kind of the two things that have changed, was again the trap bar and the vertical jump. But it served us well. It gives us a global picture, and then we use that in a small way to guide kind of the program as we go, because with each academy, it's not a cookie cutter program that we just copy and paste, because the individuals are different. So a lot of the benchmarks are the same, and the things that we need to get to a lot, at the same points throughout the academy may be the same, but the workouts themselves, the training sessions are never just copy paste. It's okay, what do we need to work on with this group and why?
Oh, that's interesting. We just did a I just this was last, I think it was in January, did a research study on a tactical power cycle, and the idea of tactical power is a cool sounding word, much more difficult to figure out how do you assess it. I'm an assessment driven coach. I
Mm-hmm.
like assessments are pretty key because they make the strength conditioning coach make decisions, right? You have to make hard decisions and choose one way or the other. And I think we had 4 assessments. One was the ACFT med ball throw, just because it was in the ACFT. But it's the only one PT test I've seen tactical that has a power assessment. And the other one we had, I think we had, like for men, it was 5 power clean and push press for time at 75% of your body weight. And we had some sandbag throw. We had another. And I'm not too sure if I ever came up with a good power assessment for tactical athletes. In the past, we've used like a sandbag toss and chase, we called it, for distance. But I did try some new kind of programming as part of that. Tried some cluster strength training, did a little bit of the dynamic stuff that Louis Simmons does on his strength stuff. That was kind of fun and interesting. You say that you have your assessment, but that the programming for each class is a little bit different. Is that because of the assessment results or because your programming is evaluating? I'm just curious. You seem to indicate that the programming changes based on the group, in which my approach is to train based on the mission set, not the individuals. So can you unpack that for me or go through that?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, these are, in my opinion, like the whole tactical athlete, are they athletes? Whatever, you can get into that. That's semantics. I don't really care too much about, whether we consider them or not. But again, they are, relatively deconditioned, very inexperienced individuals that are coming in. And so after we go through the training for a couple weeks, again, which is also an evaluation in and of itself, just kind of generally what we're noticing, we go through our performance tests. And then based on those performance tests, that's what shows me what we may need to work on. So for example, if a class as a group, or like the class averages generally perform low in, say, the multi-stage fitness test or the beep test, then maybe early on we need to have a higher priority just on general conditioning and cardiovascular fitness. So can we essentially build their engine up earlier in the academy? And so maybe there's, not that we, abandon any one attribute, but, maybe there's less of an emphasis from a strength perspective, or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe we've got, a bunch of people that love to run marathons for whatever reason in an academy. And actually they're doing pretty good from a estimated VO2 standpoint, but their strength really lacks. Okay. So maybe it's vice versa. The upper body stuff, we don't see a whole lot of difference in. It's kind of, it just is what it is. But again, it kind of tells me where we're at and what we may need to work on. For example, if the group really struggles with pull-ups, like, okay, like maybe just our pulling strength in general, both vertical and horizontal, needs to have a little bit more of an emphasis. or again with the vertical jump, if they're falling kind of below the minimum standard as we kind of define it or set it, maybe we need to work obviously more on putting them through a proper plyometric progression and getting them exposure to that dynamic type of movement. And so yes, a lot of the structure is the same, but within that, that's where we start to try to address the class as individuals and try to make the program fit what they need in particular. And that's kind of the approach.
Do you have I imagine you have a mid-cycle reassessment, or is it just the end of cycle reassessment? And do you have standards like for the 1RM trap bar deadlift? Do you have a standard you want to meet, this relative strength or something?
Yep. Typically what we'll do is it's just we call it our entry and our exit evaluation. Within that, we may, depending, and this is not necessarily recorded, but we may do a kind of a check-in at the midway point, but usually it's just entry and exit. So usually about, again, 4 weeks in or about 2 weeks outside of graduation, we'll go through it again. And the minimum standards are, they're minimum. It's pretty low. For example, like with the trap bar deadlift, like our requirement is you need to be able to pull 225 pounds, male or female. And the reason for that is just kind of looking at the demands of, or the potential demands of the profession. If we need to drag another body, we need to drag someone out of a situation, can we pick up something kind of within that range, within that over 200 pounds? And so 225, again, for a single was something that it was like, said, okay, like if we can do this, like bare minimum, you have the requisite strength. With pull-ups, our number is 6. With push-ups, we'd like to see 30 on the metronome. With our vertical test, this is where it gets into gender specific, with 15 being the minimum for our males and 13 for our females.
Do you, for your strength programming throughout the cycle before you do the reassessment, is that a percentage-based progression based on the trap bar, or is it just, old school, 5 pounds heavier each week? And are you implementing other exercises? Tell me about your strength work.
Yeah, so we'll use the trap bar because that's really the only one that we actually will do some percentage-based work on. Is usually coming out of that performance testing, we'll do a solid 4-week phase where we are actually then using that information in a 5-3-1 style based off Jim Wendler's work. I've found that to be really successful. And in building that strength up. And so we'll run a cycle of that. And then depending on how long the academy is, we may move on to different variations. One of the things we also try to focus on is from like an educational standpoint is exposing the recruits to as much as possible to expand their exercise library, if you will. So we may, we'll definitely teach them how to do a conventional pull from the floor, or depending on who they are and, their size or what they struggle with, maybe we'll encourage them to use a sumo style pull. So yeah, that's usually the only percentage-based work was usually done around the trap bar. And then usually towards the end of the academy, when we start to approach our end of academy performance testing, is we'll bring back that percentage-based trap bar work just to kind of refresh and get them working with that particular implement so that we can demonstrate.
Can you go into detail? So you said you do your 1RM trap bar heavy single assessment, and then you do a 5-3-1 progression. And I imagine it's percentage based. So I can't remember that. I mean, this is like, I know that's the 5-3-1 book, but I was doing this stuff in high school, and it was like 5 sets of 5, 3 sets of 3, and then a 5-4-3-2-1. That was is it the same? And how are you, if that is the same, like for the first 5x5, what percentage are you using a 1RM? And how many sessions are you doing at that progression before you move? Go ahead.
So it changes every week, and so I run it pretty true to form as it was written, where the first week is 3 working sets of 5, and that would be at 65%, 75%, and 85%. But
Of
that
1RM.
of the 1RM, and then that final set, they're going for as many reps as possible with good form, which is
At
always
85%.
right, which is always the
Got it.
caveat of making sure that we're monitoring good form and they're helping each other out. And then the second week, it just increases by 5%. So and your rep scheme goes to threes. So 3 sets of 3 where you're at 70, 80, 90% of the 1 rep max. And I forgot to mention, we use the 90% working max. So it's actually, oh, sorry, we're having trouble with video.
Yeah, I can still hear you. I think your connection's a little weird, but
I apologize for that.
just keep talking. We'll just do the voice.
Okay.
It'll catch up.
Yeah, hopefully it'll catch up at some point. So I'm frozen in time. But yeah, so the second week will be sets of 3 at 70, 80, 90. Again, as many as possible on the final set with good form. And then the third week, it increases again by 5%, where you're working at 75, 85, 95% of the 90% working max for as many as possible. And then we'll do a deload week after that. So there's certainly warm-up set.
Right.
All right. Yeah, sometimes the internet out here in our training facility can be a little spotty, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of how we approach at least implementing a 5-3-1 style with that particular exercise.
And during those weeks, is it training that strength 2 or 3 times a week? Just probably twice, but I guess
We just hit it once.
Once a week. Okay.
Especially given working with police academies, if I only see them 3 times, depending on the size of the group too. Like, for example, we have 50, or well, we're a little bit less than that now, but we started with 50 in the current class. Our weight room cannot handle 50 individuals at one time. So the group is split into sections, where one section will be with me in the weight room and the other section will be completing some kind of conditioning session. And that's overseen by one of our instructors or one of the cadre members.
And then they switch mid session or something.
Yep. So unfortunately, especially with police, like I may only see them for like the actual strength sessions once a week. And so that's why we try to microdose little things here and there, or I'll give them stuff to do at home, or, if they're able. But we usually just hit that once a week. And so the way that I approach the week, sticking with the police theme, would be exactly that. Is essentially they are getting 1 strength session, 1 conditioning session, and then if we have a third for that week, usually I'll keep them together as a class. Weather permitting, we like to get outside, and that could look like a number of different things, but it's basically another conditioning session. With our fire department, our fire academy, when we have them 4 times a week on that Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday split, is typically we'll work upper body with some kind of conditioning on Monday, lower body on Tuesday. They have active recovery stuff to do on their own at home through the app that we use on Wednesdays. And then when they come back, we do a total body session on Thursdays. And then Friday is what we call our bay days. And that's where we'll mix in another group conditioning session. And so that's often some kind of circuit training, or maybe we'll be outside in gear, utilizing some of the actual job skills as part of a workout. And so that's kind of like almost like a flex day.
Got it. And how many academies are you running a year?
It depends on need, but typically, at least so far in my experience here, from the fire side, anywhere from 1 to 2, and police, we have 3 a year. There's a real need for police officers, I think, across the country, and we're no different. So they're trying to get roughly 50 recruits per class, and those classes, because there's 3 of them, will actually overlap by about 4 weeks. So one will be nearing graduation, one's just starting. Like later this summer, we will have 2 police academies and a fire academy, and it's all in the same facility. And so we'll have 120 recruits running around the building at some point, which is chaotic, but it's fun too. Like I love it. But
take me back to your minor league coaching days, and tell me what that was like for coaching. Were you traveling with the teams? Did they come back to little towns? Where were you working out of? I mean, were you in some cool little town, like working with like my son lives in Portland or near Portland, and the team he goes to watch is called the Pickles or something like that.
okay.
I mean, there's some fun minor league teams. Go ahead and tell me about that life. That must have been kind of interesting.
Yeah, the names are fun. It was fun. It probably wouldn't be fun now as an older guy with kids and and all that. But as a young single guy, it was a blast. It was hard work. We were severely underpaid, but
How much did you make?
so well, it varied by year. But I'll say this: and as when I my first year in a full time role, I made $8,000.
I mean, that's what you got as a paycheck. That's not what you netted.
Yeah. Uh, and there was no benefits, but it was a full-time role. I was basically like a grad assistant or a paid intern. And then the couple years after that, so as I moved up, got benefits, I was in the mid-20s, low fees. But as a AAA strength and conditioning coach, I had been in AAA for 3 years. This is now 7, 8 seasons in. I am a veteran of the minor league system. I'm making $39,000 a year.
Starving to death.
Yeah, as a 29, 30-year-old man, like it. And that was part of it, was that it got to the point where I was like, I don't think I can hang on any longer. And most coaches don't last as long as I did. And I'm not saying that I'm tougher or better than anybody else. I'm saying, like, financially, a lot of coaches go in 2, 3 years and go, okay, I'm going to use this to springboard to a college job or a tactical job or whatever it was. But like, I was all I ever wanted to do was work at the major league level for, that's all I wanted to do. That was it. That was the goal. And I was willing to sacrifice. Thankfully, after that season, because I was very close to having to walk away for financial reasons and find something else. And so thankfully, the Atlanta Braves called and selected me to be their minor league coordinator. So I got a pretty significant bump there, which kept me alive. But it doesn't pay what people think it would. Like it's tough. Like, your major league staff, depending on experience, of course, and their title and role and all that. But like, you know, low 100,000, maybe less than that. As an assistant with the Mets, I wasn't at 100,000. I wasn't making six figures. I'll tell you that, which, surprises a lot of people. But to go back to your question, was yes, we traveled around with the team that
I
first
mean,
year.
you're not flying, right? You're riding on buses and stuff.
Yes and no. Early, if you're at the lower levels, like, it is charter bus and get used to it. So like my first season was in Missoula, Montana, and I loved it up there. It was great. Um, but yeah, like you play, if you're at home, let's say you play a series, and then after the final game of that series that night, you're packing up, you're getting on the bus, and you're driving upwards of, at the most, I think the longest one I ever had was 14 hours. Actually, through Wyoming. There was a team in Casper. Um, I don't know if they're still there anymore, but um, one of the benefits to being a coach was you got two seats, right? So the poor players are in the back, and it's just, they're sitting, it's just two seats on either side of the aisle, and they're scrunched in. And so, and half of them are from Latin countries, so that half of them don't speak the language or don't speak English very well. um, and so, like, in the middle of the night, the funniest part was, like, the coaches sit in the front and you get two seats. And so what I found was I bought an igloo cooler, one, to save money because I could pack food and take it with me because I was making such terrible money, but it also served as a footrest. So our athletic trainer and I could lay on our sides and put our feet on the footrest to get like some extra room to try and sleep an hour or two during these things. But like, players would be laying on the floor. And so, like, if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to like climb around and over and under these sleeping players. And like, it's really not glorious. And the ballparks are, a lot of them were good, but quite a few of them were trash. There are no weight rooms.
Yeah,
So we would have a travel trunk with, bands and maybe a kettlebell and some med balls and whatever we could bring with us. And then in the mornings, you would go to the designated team gym. So the home team would partner with some kind of, Planet Fitness or 24 whatever it was, say, hey, these guys are going to come in. So we would get up, usually the bus would be at 9 or 10 in the morning or whatever, take the players to a public gym, trying to corral these players in a public gym, try to get some good training in, get them back on the bus, back to the hotel, and then of course later in the afternoon go to the ballpark and continue to do your work there. And so that continues, and then up until the AAA level, and then usually at AAA flights start to come around. And so, but you're flying Southwest, so there's a baseball team mixed in with everyday people. It's not like we're flying private jets or anything at that point. And so yeah, the travel was almost worse with flights, because in order to get to the next city in time to play the game that evening, you're the first flight out. So the bus would meet at your ballpark at like 2 or 3 in the morning to get to the airport by 5 for a 6 o'clock flight for a layover in Vegas to get you to Oklahoma City. So, and plus the time change and all that. So, and then for staff, we would have to get there early to set everything up. So like the travel day was like, I would always have a headache, your diet and just everything's just off. But again, that's part of the fun of it too. Like looking back on it. Sometimes it was not fun, but yeah.
You, I was just reading your resume. You did some work with pitchers. The only time that, well, I guess we'll talk the majors here in a little bit. Just given, I mean, there's always talent on these teams, right? That is, and they're all looking to move up. And I'm sure there were some players who are more motivated than others, just like always. But did you ever get to work with, a pitcher or a player who ended up making it to the majors? And was there anything you did different with that person, or did the manager say, "Hey, coach, I want you just to work with them," or anything like that? Can you take me into that like that?
Yes, definitely worked with individuals that made it to the major league level. I mean, obviously that's how it works, right? The minor leagues are developing these players to move up. Well, if you're around long enough, and especially if you work at the AA or AAA level, like you are going to work with individuals that are going to at least get a shot. So it's cool to be. That's the most rewarding part of it. Was like, especially for like maybe not the top prospect, but like that just kind of minor league grinder that just
Grinder, yeah.
does everything the right way, just a great person, and like they finally get their shot, even if it's just a cup of coffee. Like it still gives me goosebumps sometimes, just to be like, it just feels good to say, you know, however small a role as I got to play a little part in getting to know this individual and helping them along, whether it's just staying healthy or helping them improve on the on the field in their sport. That was really special to get to be a part of some of those stories. And
Anybody stand out for you?
boy,
You don't have to go into names if you don't want to, but maybe just the character
yeah.
without the name.
Yeah, I probably won't say names, but there was definitely a couple like that where it's like, because when you're a coach, you kind of know like who the prospects are, right? And that's known information to anyone that wants to find it on the internet, on MLB Pipeline or whatever, like the top 40 prospects for each organization. And so you know who those guys are, but what often happens during the season is like, maybe because of who they are, those individuals don't get a shot just because they're kind of um, trying to play their development appropriately and not push them too far too soon, right? More than they can handle. Or there'll be individuals that, like I said, have been like those utility players, right? That just can do everything and are just fantastic athletes and great at everything, but it's almost like, are they good enough? And so you know who they are, and you know how to what the expectations are, and you root for them and you hope that they get a shot, and obviously have success when they get there. And so and on the flip side, I've worked with top prospects that sign for more money than I'll ever see and never made it, and that's just part of the business. And it's who's to say what goes in. It's obviously multifactorial, and it's hard to pinpoint why did one guy work versus one didn't. And with all the revelations in technology and sports science and all that stuff, we're getting way into the weeds and the nitty gritty of like how to evaluate that stuff, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Did you have a at the home baseball field? Did you actually have a weight room?
Yes. So usually at your home stadium, you would have a weight room. Again, at the lower levels, it's like a broom closet, yeah, or pulling guys outside the locker room, get stuff done for space reasons. But yeah, usually when at like the high A, even low A level, like you got a pretty decent space, enough to where you could fit a cable column, a squat rack, a set of dumbbells, some kettlebell, all the kind of the necessary stuff. And then, of course, the spring training facilities, really, really fantastic facilities at that level. And of course, the major leagues as well. So,
Did the players at the minor league level, did they have to train with you, or was it up to them?
yes. So in season, there's one strength coach and one athletic trainer assigned to a team, and go get them. And so they do train with us. Like I said, it was we're there every single day. So there's maybe a day off every 21, 22 days. But other than that, like, they're like your family. You're with them every day. And so we would require our position players to get at least 2 total body sessions in per week, and usually 2 conditioning sessions per week. And then with pitchers, it depended on their role, if they were a starter or a reliever. But usually our pitchers would be on, a 5-day rotation. And so after they would pitch, they would usually either do an upper body session that night and maybe a lower body the next day, or they might do a total body that night after their appearance. And then usually again, there'd be, either an upper split, however, the coach wanted to do it, or a total body session again following their bullpen, which is typically done on day 3. And then they're conditioning most days in between that. So that was kind of the way that.
So when you say upper body and total body, you're talking, and lower body, you're talking strength training.
Yep.
It's not like and then your conditioning would be separate from that. And so you gotta be resourceful when you're traveling, obviously for strength training, but at your home gym, you're able to use barbells and loading and everything else, I assume.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I would try to forecast and look at our schedule and be like, okay, how many days are we at home this month, or, in the next 2 weeks, or even just this week when we're on the road? Am I familiar with where we're going? Do I know what I have access to in the visiting city? Would play into it. And maybe it's like, okay, I know that where we're going, we don't have great facilities. So I'm going to emphasize this while we're at home and we have more controlled variables. And then we'll get creative when we're on the road. But like, our conditioning stuff was mostly, field-based conditioning, which is obviously, just different ways of sprints and running and doing stuff like that. And then, if we were at home, depending on what we had, we could maybe mix that up a little bit. That was
so for the everybody but the pitchers, was the programming pretty much the same in more general fitness, or was there anything specific you were doing for baseball? Like I've heard that collegiate programs still emphasize power cleans and sprints for hitters and stuff. But was there anything specific or special you were doing for baseball?
Well, there were definitely considerations for different positions. So, for example, one of the cool things that you get to do at the major league level when you have the ability to, all the data and all the things that we're able to evaluate, is you can really get dialed into what that one individual needs. An example of that would be like a center fielder, where we know how many efforts they complete in a game, chasing down
to like run and chase a ball.
Yeah. So essentially how many sprints they get in a game, and at what percent of their max velocity that they've ever hit on a field is. So we can put a percentage to it. And then we know that we would say like, hey, generally, like, we need to make sure that over the course of a week, we need X amount of sprints at or above 80% of your in-game max speed. And so in a particular game, or in a couple days, if that athlete didn't hit that, for whatever reason, the ball wasn't hit their way, or it was just not as much action, then we would essentially dose them with a couple high intensity sprints after the game on one day. So like, that's where you can get really dialed in with some really cool stuff. At the minor league levels, at least when I was there, that stuff didn't exist yet anywhere, but especially at the minor leagues.
So just to take me to the technology, the player is wearing a GPS device of some type that's tracking his movement and his speed, or what device are they using?
Well, it depends.
I know there's different devices, but
yeah, and this is where it comes down to the player and their willingness to do that. So we can't make them wear anything.
Okay.
It's up to them. So if a player is willing to, you could use GPS tracking, units in their jersey, and some that did it. Like, we had our clubhouse guys sew a special pocket that we could put it in and pull it back out of their uniform. But in all stadiums, they have these TrackMan cameras where they can you can essentially zero in on any player moving across the field as it goes. And so that stuff doesn't have to be wearable, but it can be valuable information to us as performance professionals. But other than that, like at the minor league levels, it was like, hey, generally, what do we need to work on? Like, we need them to be strong in the transverse plane, in the frontal plane, especially if you're, swinging and rotating, a sport that involves a lot of that. We need them to be durable and robust to stay healthy through that. Definitely, shoulder considerations, certainly, for our pitchers, overhead throwing athletes in general, but especially with their volume and workloads, what does that look like? And so to answer go back to your question, was a lot of the conditioning sessions were done as a team, right? The team setting, if we're talking about position players. The lifts themselves, it was kind of up to the coach of like, how individualized do you want to get? When we were on the road in public gyms, yeah, we're not doing individualized programs. I can't keep track of that. It's like, here's the lift. And then we would have like laminated cards and just like go do it. At home, you could get a little bit more dialed in with what that particular athlete needed. If it was, first step quickness or top end, speed, or, just their hips suck. We got to get them moving a little bit better. And then, of course, just keeping them healthy is really the name of the game, because if the ultimate goal when you're working with any professional sport, but especially baseball, is making sure your players play. And when we play every day, that's ultimately their availability is their best ability, as the saying goes, and that's our role.
I know there are strength and conditioning coaches who specifically just do stuff for pitchers and throwers. And I'm kind of curious. I know you did some work with pitching, especially with, like you said, the volume. I don't know. I have no idea how many pitches a pitcher will throw in a game. If it's all strikes, it's not that many. But, if he's working more, I imagine they all get iced up after the game. But can you tell me about some of the unique elements of by position stuff that you worked with? I had spoken to a coach previously, and he had done some work with catchers. Actually, one of my athletes he was a former minor league catcher, and his knee and low back issues there for catchers. Can you take me into some of the position stuff that was interesting to work with as a strength and conditioning coach, and some of the things you did to do that?
Sure. Let's see. So with pitchers in particular, again, it kind of depended on their role. And so we'll start with like
So a starter versus a reliever.
Right. So a
So a
starter.
reliever's going to throw less pitches, right?
Yeah. So a reliever's going to throw less generally. Well, we'll talk about relievers for a little bit. So what the interesting part with relievers, especially as you get to the higher levels, is that their roles can kind of change a little bit, where we talk about like middle relief, or are they a closer within being a reliever? Like there's even further kind of, defined roles of how they're typically utilized, or like who's kind of like your long guy if your starter gets in a bad spot, someone that could potentially string together, 3+ innings to get your team out of a jam, so you don't blow through your whole bullpen. And a lot of times these relievers now, again, at the higher levels, will be utilized on back-to-back days, but you don't know when those days are going to be, right? Because it's all game dependent and situational dependent. For example, if you have like, your essentially your, laser rocket arm, ninth inning, slam the door kind of guy, they're basically these days, it's all out effort. They're trying to get in and out, and ideally, under 20 pitches, 15 pitches, something like that. Really high intensity efforts, but we don't know that maybe tomorrow they might be used again in a similar role, where they have to, if they go back to back days. And so from a training perspective, it's like, where and when do we get our training sessions in? Because again, we have to train and compete on the same day, and that's one of the biggest challenges. So a lot of technology comes into play there, especially from more of like the medical side of the athletic training side. We had access to, obviously, force plates, and different other different technology devices that could help us measure like their isometric strength in different positions. And so that would be one of the ways that we would kind of do like fatigue monitoring or, kind of workload
So
monitoring.
you test fatigue and see if they could stand a training session that day, knowing they might need to work later that night or something.
Yeah, or maybe the next day where we test them to see where they're at, and it's like, okay, if their external rotation, isometric strength is, within a certain percentage lower than where it normally is. Okay, maybe we have two different plans for, our intervention, if you will, to help get them either prepared to pitch again that night if needed, or hopefully at least getting one day off and being ready to go again the next day. When it comes to starters, their schedule's known for the most part, which makes it easier to program and mix these things in. But then, of course, this is where kind of more your pitch counts come into play. Where do they typically sit, or how do we build them up? As they're doing right now, getting ready for the season, is appropriate progression in pitch volume and or even the types of pitches that they're throwing and with what frequency.
Would you have input into that, or that be decided by the position coach, but that data would be reported to you so you could track it for fatigue and on the strength and conditioning side? Or did the pitching coach come to you and say, hey, how many pitches can I have him throw today? Go ahead.
That's certainly how it works. So it's very much open communication in a good organization, and thankfully I never came across a situation where like that was a problem or an issue. It was like, hey, the strength staff and the athletic training staff, our PTs, or the sports med department as a whole is communicating with all of our coaching staff. So the managers know, especially the pitching coaches would know, we would have an injury report that goes to them every morning, certainly would sit down and discuss any variations or adjustments that may need to be made in their schedule. For example, like throwing the bullpen, right? So different pitchers have different preference on which days they want to throw it, but maybe based on the volume of or the intensity of, or basically how hard that previous outing was, maybe we push that bullpen a day, or maybe the bullpen volume is condensed or shortened a little bit just to work on giving them the best opportunity to recover in between there.
Was there a go-to exercise for a right-handed pitcher to address overuse?
No, I don't.
I mean, is pitching a throwing? I mean, is pitching a pulling motion? It's a pulling motion, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I always liken it to kind of like a slingshot, right? Is like we need to, create force is generated from distal areas, moving its way up, and then the actual throwing motion is the final piece, and that kind of shot put or that catapult or whatever analogy you want to use. And so arm care, when it comes down to that sort of stuff, like there's certainly kind of the staples of making sure that our rotator cuff is able to perform the way it should, or essentially is it strong enough. Certainly ensuring that the scapula is able to upwardly and downwardly rotate or anteriorly and posteriorly tilt. So basically, does it move well? And then kind of working your way down is what does their trunk rotation look like? Even further down the chain, getting into their hips. On their front side leg, what does their internal rotation look like? On their stance leg, are they able to stabilize in the frontal plane so that they can get a proper drive off of the rubber? And so there's a lot of things that go into it. And so like it would be really hard to say like, yes, there's
Right.
one exercise that every pitcher must be doing in order to stay healthy. Like I said, it's kind of, and it kind of goes back to like what I'm doing now is just like, I feel like the better condition you are in and the more exposure you get to different things, the more durable you're going to be, right? So pitching is very much a repetitive motion, right? You're throwing with the same arm every time, right? So your one leg's pretty much doing the same thing every time you deliver the ball, your front side leg, your shoulders, whatever. And so that can in and of itself could, in theory, potentially, create issues of, overuse or strain or whatever. And so a lot of times the thought process was like almost like, how do we counteract that? And it could be as simple as something as like, hey, if we do grid left trunk rotations, right, as we're throwing, maybe we just do a little bit more volume of a trunk rotation to the right, like I don't have anything scientifically to back that up, as far as data goes, but like just theoretically, it's like, again, if we can make them durable and robust to as many position variables or options that may be out there, if we train in that position, then we're more likely to be safe in that position, and all the changes, minute changes in your delivery, because no one delivery is exactly the same, right?
So let's bounce you up to the major leagues. You with the Atlanta Braves, right?
So the Atlanta Braves was
And the Mets, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, the Atlanta Braves, I was the minor league strength and conditioning coordinator. And so that's kind of like, it's in between. So in that role, I oversaw the player development program and supervised 7 strength coaches that worked at the minor league levels. So you kind of
There
oversaw.
were several teams out there.
Yep. And so a lot of it was like traveling out to the different minor league teams, checking in on our coaching staff, developing them as strength coaches, as best as could, and essentially being, in charge of seeing all that. And there's, admin responsibilities that came with that as well. And then the next step, if you're truly following a, like a ladder progression up to the major league level. And then I got an opportunity to be the assistant performance coach with the New York Mets. So that was my experience at the major league level.
So tell me about that and how things changed. And I guess my first question would be, I've spoken to some strength and conditioning coaches who work at pro levels, and it's kind of uneven. Some of them get to work with the athletes, but it's kind of up to the athletes. Some of the athletes have their own strength conditioning staff and guys they work with. What was it like there for you at the Mets, and how receptive were the players to your input into training?
Generally speaking, I would say very open. It's like I said, it's you and maybe like depending on the department and depending on the team, but typically there's a head strength coach and an assistant strength coach, essentially
Just a couple of you.
just 2 coaches for the team. And so it kind of depends on how you guys like to operate as coaches, whether it's like, hey, you have designated guys, like, okay, that, I work with this guy and this guy and this guy primarily. And I never had that situation, but it was kind of just like organically, like just kind of who gravitated towards who. And being the assistant, I always, allowed players to go and communicate with the head strength coach if, that's who they wanted to talk to. And my role was to support and assist. But I definitely had, my kind of handful of guys that, like, when they came in, they came to me and I was primarily working with them one-on-one. And so you definitely run into scenarios where athletes have their guys, whether it's a physical therapist or a strength coach that they work with in the off season. And so the way that we always tried to approach it was like, hey, that's fantastic. If you're following, like, say, their program, or they're trying to give you some kind of input as to what you should be doing, all we ask is that we get the opportunity to communicate with them, so that everybody's on the same page, and so that we can provide the best, level of care for you as a professional athlete. So they're not as common, but it definitely comes up sometimes, a point of frustration. But again, I think it's about how you approach it, right? You can either be like, oh, well, no, I'm your strength coach, I'm the guy with the team, and this is, how we're going to do it. But like, you're going to lose that individual real fast. So instead, it's better to bring them into the fold to a certain degree and say, hey, let's all work together to make sure that you are getting everything that you need. And that approach goes a long way.
What was the fitness culture like? I guess baseball in general, and then was there a difference between the fitness cultures at the minor league and the major league level? For example, not knowing anything, I'd assume you had guys in the minor league a little hungrier and worked harder maybe than at the major league, but I could be wrong. And it could just be individual player based. But could you describe a fitness culture in general and then the differences, or was it more individually based?
I'd say it's more individually based. There are certain, yeah, individually based. Like, it's that, I always joke that, like, baseball is such a unique sport because you could have someone that is just, by no other, category or attribute would anyone consider them a professional athlete, but they've got, God blessed them with a lightning bolt of an arm, and they're just really good at that one thing. So, like, would they have any chance of surviving a fire academy? Absolutely not.
Right, right, right.
But, highly specialized athletes, especially the higher you get, you certainly run into those individuals where it's like, and maybe that's all they care about. Like, they don't care about training or doing all these things. Like they one track mind, that's all they want to do is do that one thing. And it's just a matter of finding ways to connect with them just to get what you need out of them. At the lower levels, you certainly come across, and at the major league level, you come across guys that are really hungry and take it really, really seriously. And those guys are fun to work with, right? Because they're open to all things, they're exploring all things. But you definitely get those individuals that just really aren't motivated to do anything else, which can be pretty shocking, especially at the major league level. Or if you're at the AAA, double A or triple A, it's like, man, you're so close. Like if you would just do this or that, like it could be who knows, but like sometimes it was yeah, it was kind of like, man, like this is kind of it's surprising where, from the outside perspective, people would think, what is a physical or what is a professional athlete capable of physically. And again, sometimes these guys were
So
again.
specialized. Yeah, we see him on TV. The pictures with the dog. The dad bod.
Mhm.
The one example I remember hearing the name of a strength and conditioning coach was a New York Yankees coach who was fired because I think they had three athletes during the season pull their hamstrings running bases. And I think to myself, man, I don't know how much input that guy had, these athletes, to train
Yeah.
them. I mean, so I imagine every strength and conditioning coach at the major league level was worried about hamstring pulls after that. But yeah, I guess talk about that. Talk about, I mean, how do you get fired? How do you get hired at that level of a job? I mean, is it like college football where the college football coach brings his own strength staff with him? It doesn't matter, or probably at the professional level of football too. It doesn't matter how good a strength coach you are. If they hire a new football coach, you're probably going to lose your job and have to go searching. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's less of that in professional baseball as there appears to be in collegiate sports. I never worked in collegiate sports, so I can't speak to it, but I know that from talking to individuals. Like that's kind of how it works is you kind of hitch your wagon to, a quarterback's coach when you're young and hope that they carry you around as you go, as they
Yeah,
go
right, right,
level. It doesn't really,
right.
at least in my experience, it hasn't really worked that way in professional baseball. The way that I got to the major league level was, at least I'd like to think that this is why it was, is that like I put in the effort, I worked really hard, I studied, probably when other guys weren't studying. I really put in the effort to try and find ways to always constantly improve and push myself to be a better coach, whether it was from the X's and O's perspective or from a more of a personal development or from a leadership development standpoint when I got into those types of roles. And then of course, the more time you spend in a particular sport with your network, that's where you start to get the opportunities where, because like anything else, like people talk to people, right? So it's like, hey, we need a minor league coordinator or we need a major league strength coach. All right, well, who's in charge of hiring that? Well, it may be the athletic trainer. So who does the athletic trainer know? Who's a strength coach that they've worked with and they trust to bring in and handle this? Or maybe it's your director of player development, which would be someone who's not in our field but has enough exposure, like I want that guy. So there is a little bit of that potential, but that was one of the things that eventually played a part in me starting my own company, was getting to the major league level and really having that realization. I always knew it, but once I got there, it was like, yeah, we could have a really, really bad season performance, from wins and losses, and through no fault of my own. And it's not even a reflection of me as a coach. I could lose my job at any moment. Doesn't matter. And unfortunately, a lot of times, like hitting, well, all coaches are susceptible, but like, yeah, in certain cases, if your injury numbers are not great, or if you're at the bottom of the league, like you're getting a little bit nervous. And again, it's like it's so multifactorial. It's hard to say like, okay, well, it's definitely the strength and conditioning program, or it's definitely our athletic trainers aren't getting them, whatever it may be. Uh, so yeah, it's a little bit scary, but that's part of it, and that's you just have to control what you can control, do the best that you can, so that if that situation happens, you're like, at least maybe take a little bit of solace in the fact that like I did everything I could and I'm confident in my abilities as a coach. It's just a tough situation, and hopefully more opportunities present themselves.
So let's transition to first responders. There in Aurora, are you able to work with guys out of the academy?
Mm-hmm. So it's challenging. So the way it works in the city of Aurora, like I said, is I'm based here at our public safety training center, and the city of Aurora is unique in that both police and fire work in the same or train out of the same location. That isn't necessarily the case for most. So I stay pretty busy in the mornings with academies, whatever we have going on at that particular time of the year, and then the rest of the day for me is kind of open to what I want to make it. And so one of the initiatives that we've really been working on and getting into place is what we call the return to duty progression. So just like you would a return to play, right? This is essentially our rehab process. So we are fortunate to have 2 physical therapists that are full-time, but they are at a different location. And so one of the things that I try to do is come alongside our physical therapist and provide additional support, either in the early, acute phase of an injury, but then in particular, as an individual gets closer to their return to full duty date, when things kind of shift more into the performance realm, is giving them the support to make sure that one, or at least early on, that the wheels don't fall off, meaning that we maintain as many physical qualities as possible,
So
working
they're
around.
not gaining 75 pounds waiting to get right.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And
All right.
and man, does that happen.
Yep.
So there's that piece. And then again, towards the end of the rehab process, it would increase with the number of sessions they come to see me as, again, we start to get back to
Are
true.
they required to come see you, or is it volunteer?
Right now it's volunteer. So we are working
Got
on
it.
getting these things in policy. And that's one of the things that, I'm learning as I get deeper into kind of the tactical space, is all the, the nuances of any job. And with first responders, it's like, okay, like if you're trying to implement something, how do you go about doing that? And there's risk management and legal and unions and all
Yeah.
the different players that could come into it that have an influence on what you're trying to do. It's actually being worked on right now, and I'm really excited to finally get it formalized, to where it would be required at varying levels early on. The goal is to have them once a week to come out to see me, so that again, we're not gaining 70 pounds, and we're maintaining whatever we can. And then once the docs, our work comp docs and our physical therapists say, hey, yeah, estimated, you're probably 3 to 4 weeks out, then that would increase and give them the opportunity to practice the skills that they need to out here at our training facility. So for example, like with fire, and maybe if you had a shoulder injury, okay, we need to take you through a proper progression of throwing ladders. Or with our police officers, say if it was a hamstring injury, maybe we try to replicate, a chase scenario where they have to hop out of the squad car and go track somebody down. So essentially trying to give them opportunities to practice the things that they need to in a controlled environment, so that when they go back online, they're feeling physically and mentally confident going back into the job, instead of shift one being like, okay, I hope I'm good, which has been the kind of the MO for the first responders until this point.
Does the either department have a annual fitness assessment?
Yes. So our fire
Oh, really?
department, our fire department has they call it the PFA. So it's our annual fitness test, or the physical fitness assessment. And so that's usually done in the early fall, where we schedule it out here. The crews come around, we run them through it. And then for police, they have, to my understanding, it's out there, but it has not been administered in like 10 years. Ironically, there is a fitness evaluation as part of the application process for police, but not for fire. So one of the things that I'm trying to work on is essentially get both for both. So there needs to be a fitness component to the application process for a number of reasons, but then there also needs to be an annual fitness test. And this is much harder to get with police, but I'm not gonna just throw up my hands and say, too bad, so sad. Like I'm gonna keep pushing for what we can. And so what it'll likely be is some kind of incentive-based program where they can hopefully accrue a certain amount of hours off that they could tack on to, vacation days or sick days, whatever that they have, to try and start to implement some kind of annual fitness test. And a lot of it comes down to the messaging, right? Because a lot of individuals will get defensive or kind of standoffish about it because, oh, well, you're trying to take me offline, or it's like a witch hunt. And it's like, no, that's not the case at all. This is to support you guys in everything that you're doing so that we can identify potential issues before they turn into real issues. And that can, and with departments too, that can be anywhere from your general physical, cancer screenings, annual fitness tests. Like the more that we can support, the more that we can give or do for these individuals, we may catch something. I've heard stories of, someone went through it, the annual fitness test, performed really poorly, had some symptoms, and they ended up sending them to the hospital for an evaluation. And the guy basically was having a cardiac event, and it practically saved the guy's life because they were able to identify, what was something that was going on. So yeah, that's kind of where it stands from an annual fitness test. Is my goal, and one of the things I'm working on is trying to get, like I said, something in place for both, whether it's, it's a part of policy or if it's, an incentivized type program. I think whatever we can do is a step in the right direction.
I've done a lot of work thinking and writing and studying first responder fitness cultures. Do you know if the fire stations have dedicated spaces to train and equipment?
Mm-hmm. This is where I liken it to the minor league baseball system, right? Like there's every station has a gym. To what extent? Depends, right? So again, some of them are, it's a hole in the wall with, mismatched equipment. And some of them are like awesome gyms that I wish I could play around in for, every day. And so it kind of depends as far as what the department is able to provide. Sometimes crews will combine their funds if they really want something in their gym. But, the goal for me on that aspect is to essentially try to standardize as much equipment as possible so that, if you're roving or whatever station, if you move, like you kind of know what to expect, that like every one of our stations is going to have this, and this, and then slowly trying to, raise the level of that, whenever we get opportunities through either, grant funding, or if there's just, extra funds and a kind of like a slush fund available, is like, can we put that towards some kind of health and wellness related, service or support?
Do you know if the police get time on duty to train?
They currently do not. So, and again, this is
They're
like,
on their own.
police, they're gaining a special place in my heart because they have so many challenges working against them. And that's one of the things where what's different and what's challenging for them, if you're on patrol, if you're in the patrol unit, you're driving around, right? Like you're not at one place. Now they all start their day at their districts, and every district has a gym. And again, it's hit or miss. We have 3 districts. I think most of the gyms are pretty good, but again, I started my career in minor league baseball, so it's not hard to impress me, I guess. I'm like, yeah, it's got everything you need. What else? What are we complaining about? So they have the ability to train either pre or post shift. If they really wanted to, they could train during like a lunch break, but again, they're usually away from the facility, so the time to travel back, change out, or at least to a certain degree, change out, there isn't enough time. And so that's one of the things that I'm working on seeing is like, hey, is there any possibility for us to extend that by, even a half hour? Like, what would that look like? Or basically, if we want as a department or as a city to say, we value the health and wellness of our people, what are we doing to support that? And a lot of what I do is, as a credit to the city, is like, we're doing exactly that. There's someone in place here full time working to provide some of these services. So everyone on the incumbent side or the sworn personnel side, they get programs written by me. Again, it's general. We have a police program and a fire program. So, what essentially do I feel comfortable programming for the masses when I'm not there to coach them in person? Also, considering, potential equipment availability challenges and stuff like that, but they get programming from me on a daily basis. We try to match it with their shift schedule as best as possible. and it won't be perfect for everybody, but they know that they have the ability to kind of self-select which workouts they want to do on which day. It doesn't have to be done in succession based on, how their shift went, how they're recovering. And so that's one thing that we're trying to do to support them and get these. And again, from a strength and conditioning perspective, is get them what they need. And then the other thing that we started this year is just basically like open gym hours where
They're at the academy.
at the training facility. Yep. So
Yep.
the thing that sucks about it is we're not in the best location as far as like the city goes. So it's to convince people to drive on an off day or coming off a shift, but it's something where it's like, hey, I'm still available. It's a touch point for me to get to know more people and for them to come in and get coaching for free. Like it costs them nothing. And so my hope is to continue to grow what I'm doing into a full-blown department, like you would see at any professional, or collegiate, whatever sports team, where we have multiple coaches, physical therapist, athletic trainer, whatever, mental performance, like all of that is basically taking the professional sports medicine model and just trying to apply it and move it over to the first responders because they deserve it.
I know that I have come across some departments who will give their police a stipend for a gym membership,
Mm-hmm.
so they can train at lunch even on their own time. Anywhere they are in the city, or someplace close to 24-hour fitness or
Yeah,
whatever.
they do
Depends on the
get,
department.
I will say they do get free access to all Aurora recreation centers, which is great. The downside to that sometimes is, police officers may not want to go train in the same city that they work in case you bump into someone that you don't want to, but there is that in place. I would love to get to a point where it's like, hey, like, could we find the funding to essentially do that? Where it's like, hey, there's some kind of stipend, whether it would actually cover the full amount of a monthly membership or 50% or 25%, whatever it was. Those are things that we're exploring.
Is there a full-time SWAT team at
Mm-hmm.
Aurora?
Yep.
Do you get to work with them on, or have you had a chance to work with them on their selection? Those guys get time on duty to train, I'm sure. They have their own gym, I'm sure. Have you been able to work with them
Yeah.
as athletes at all? Go
Yes.
ahead.
So I do believe that they do have a training facility that they're able to utilize themselves. They come out here a ton to do training on different scenarios. So, but they're very busy and their schedule is often, as with any first responder, it's really hard to like plan because their whole job is, responding to things as they come. One thing that we've done with the SWAT team that's been cool is we've had them come in for some dedicated mobility sessions. A lot of these guys are bigger individuals that just, they're strong as an ox, but just don't move very well. And so you're kind of the typical strains and issues kind of pop up. And so it's like, how do we keep these guys moving well so that they can operate at a high level? And so my hope is to continue working that, and I'd love for it to turn into more where we get multiple sessions per week where they're coming out. But again, it's a bit of a scheduling challenge because their home base essentially is a good distance from where we are out here at the training academy. I have not had an opportunity to either evaluate or have any kind of input on their selection. It's something that they've brought up offhand. We just haven't gotten around to addressing it yet. But to that point is like, okay, if there's a need to either grow or replace somebody on the SWAT team, what is the selection process? And from a physical standpoint, what are the requirements? And does
Do they have
it make sense?
I imagine they have annual PFT, but do you know High Jeopardy PFT? They should, but I don't know for sure.
I can't speak to that. I don't know if
You
they
know,
have
yeah,
it.
got it. I wrote a essay one time called "First Responders Don't Conflate Fitness and Wellness." What I was seeing happening at the first responder units is they would put all these things together, and they'd hire a wellness coordinator who generally turned out to be a middle-aged woman who was into sleep stuff and nutrition, and all the guys would just blow her off. And I found that we conflated fitness and home life and finances and nutrition, all that stuff. There's so many things that get in the way of fitness. But when the rubber meets the road, I mean, I've known lots of guys who have had uh, dumpster fires for home lives, been gamblers, ate like shit, trained their asses off, and were
Drank.
fit and could kick ass in the field, right? So I don't like the idea of conflating them. I understand that all have something to say about job performance, but sometimes you got to be fit when you go on no sleep, right? So, is that an issue that you've come up with? I mean, I think it's exciting that Aurora has a full-time strength conditioning coach for the first responders. That's a huge step, actually, from what I've seen. But has that come up where there's been tension? I imagine there's a wellness coordinator too, but I could be wrong.
Yes, there is. And to your point, like I think generally speaking, from again rather limited experience, but from what I've noticed in the different departments that I've talked to, is that yes, a lot of times the wellness coordinator usually deals with what I would call more like public health stuff. So it's like to your point, it's like, hey, get your steps in and hydrating, drinking water, and all that stuff is super valuable. And I'm not trying to downplay any of that, but there's really next to nothing in place when it comes to physical fitness, right? It's just, hey, it's important, you know, try to work out, and that's that's basically as far as it goes with a lot of areas. And so I think that just highlights the need for career professionals to start getting involved, or trying to make the push to get into these types of roles, because like I've said, like these individuals need it so much, and so much help and direction for all the reasons that you just mentioned, right? Like there's so many compounding stresses and things from the job itself or outside the job, normal life stuff that we all deal with, and having to take one home to the other and vice versa, sleep challenges and all that stuff, is like we really need to make a push to do better. And so in Aurora in particular, they've been great. We do have a wellness coordinator, and I don't have a whole lot of interaction with them. They're kind of doing their thing, I'm doing mine. With police, they have a couple individuals that are like the wellness team, and they've been great. They've been super supportive. Like right now, we've got a survey out there to our people where with a number of different health related questions. But for me, what they allowed what I asked to be included, and they were all about, was let's poll our people. Like, let's see what our people actually think about some of this stuff, going back to like an annual fitness test. And so the questions that I asked were, do you believe that there should be a minimum physical standard in order to graduate the academy? Do you believe that law enforcement agencies should have an annual fitness assessment? And then out of curiosity, how many hours per week are you spending on fitness in general? And so I don't know how long we'll go before we close it, but we've gotten over 100 responses, and it's pretty much turned out like 90 something percent believe there should be a physical standard in order to graduate police academy. High, I think like 88% or 87% so far believe that there should be an annual fitness test. And then on average, our people are self-reporting that they're spending somewhere between the majority of 2 to 3 hours per week on fitness, which I would love to see higher. But that's stuff that we can utilize then, as part of our rationale for, should we have an annual fitness test? Like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of challenges, a lot of hurdles to overcome, but like, hey, just for what it's worth, like the people that responded, like, they believe in this. They believe that this should exist. And maybe there's some weight to that.
I've probably taken over the years 20 calls from frustrated, high performing, younger first responder tactical athletes who are trying to change the fitness cultures at their units. And discussion, they're like, I'm trying to work, with the command to get equipment, to get space, to get time on duty to train, to get a fitness assessment. And I've written about this before, but I always encourage them, don't bother with the fitness assessment. I don't know if you're familiar with Colorado Springs and the fight they had with their fitness assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And, they did it all the right ways, and they still didn't pass the legal. I mean, I think they were, don't know the details, but they lost in the courts.
Yeah,
And
there's
they
a
ended up
lawsuit.
abandoning the effort. So there's other stuff you can do, but what is so interesting is I kind of find that mostly in military, but in first responder units too, there's generally a link between fitness and performance. And so the more fit guys generally do fairly no good on performance. And they ended up congregating in the same locations within the department. So, the fit top performers, for example, will end up on the SWAT team. And the fire department, they'll end up at the most busy station or at the special ops type place. And then if you have a fitness culture at a unit that is just pretty poor all around, you'll actually lose top performers to other units, to other departments, because they'll go, look, I want to go someplace where there's more guys like me. So there's actually some loss of some good people because places aren't able to do fitness cultures or improve their fitness culture. Anyway, it's a complicated friggin' deal for sure. But I certainly don't envy you. But I remember the steps I have, man. Just get a place, on duty to train. Just start putting equipment in there. Don't ask for. Just go buy your own equipment. Like you said, you don't need much. Just putting workouts out. Just show people you're training. Make sure you're open. Take anybody who wants to train. Don't make it for just badasses, and help develop the fitness culture that way. I think it is really interesting what you said, and I had considered this, but not well enough perhaps, is that if you are a policeman, you probably don't want to go in the local 20-hour, 4-hour fitness during your lunch break training and get in some kind of conflict with somebody, unless you can disguise yourself totally as being a policeman, right?
It was
So
something
that means yeah.
something I hadn't considered either until a police officer said that, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense, because he told me he's had it happen. He walked into a gym and someone that he had arrested approached him and said, "Hey, remember me?" And of course he didn't, because it was, whatever, years
How many of
ago.
those guys? Yeah.
But that individual remembered him. I was like, wow, that's something that I never would have thought of unless someone actually told me.
The only thing I could think, is maybe allow the police to train at the fire stations. They're all around.
Yeah.
That's like mixing cat and dogs, maybe.
Nah, it's good. I want them to train together. I would love that.
We're almost up the end of it. We need to go through our lightning round. Thanks so much, Michael. Gosh, what an
Yeah.
interesting career you've had.
Thank you.
Going from grinding your way up through the minor leagues and then the majors, and now working with first responders, tactical athletes. All right, I sent you these questions ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
So your most influential strength and conditioning books.
Yeah, I got a couple. So there's always the staples like, Science and Practice of Strength Training, Zatsiorsky, and, either periodization with Bompa and all that stuff is great base level stuff. But for me, early on, and a lot of stuff that I'll encourage coaches to look towards is the Coach's Strength Training Playbook, Joe Ken.
Oh yeah,
like super easy read, like great
You found
concept.
it easy? It's pretty damn complicated. I don't think I ever fully grasped it, but
Well,
his
it's
his
a short
idea
book.
of yeah, it's short, but it's pretty dense.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
So that's a good place to start. And triphasic training from Cal Dietz was one that was influential on me early on. And then kind of going a different route, less, kind of X's and O's and more just like self-development, was Ego is the Enemy, which I know is a really, like everyone always says, but it really is a great book. Or really, honestly, anything from Ryan Holiday I personally enjoy and find a lot of value in. And then Conscious Coaching from Brett Bartholomew, I think, is a great read for coaches to start and think about the way that they approach and interact with the people that they train.
Pretty good. Most influential coaches, and this can be famous guys or just people you work with.
Yeah, most influential to me are the people that I work with. So a toast to the groups that I worked with with the Diamondbacks, the Braves, and the Mets. Maybe not necessarily like the big names in the industry, but like some of the best people and some of the best coaches that I've ever worked with, and really, really influenced my own career. But the kind of the big ones that I always looked at, especially again early on when it comes like the baseball world, Eric Cressy's a big one to look towards. Boyle has obviously done a lot for the field in a number of ways. Dan Pfaff and the group at Altus, their foundations course is fantastic. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I enjoyed that. And like Derek Hansen would be another one from kind of more of like a sprint perspective.
Altus, is that ALTUS?
ALTIS. So they were originally based out of Arizona, and I think they've since either opened another location or kind of moved more towards, I think it's somewhere in Georgia. Lot of really great coaches, and they're a track group or organization, but obviously that can play a lot into a number of different areas, strength and conditioning as far as different sports. So Yeah.
So most influential programming tools. So this can be general like plyos or shuttle sprints or 1RM testing, stuff that is really you kind of keep coming back to and really is you've worked with and rely on.
That's a good question. I mean, as far as like an actual implement or a tool, I think there's a lot of value in gaining proficiency with a barbell. I think there's a ton of value to dumbbells and kettlebells and all that as well. But I think, again, with the population I'm working with now, not a lot of people have had a ton of experience of like actually working with various barbell movements. And so that's something that I've come back to a lot of, just like really teaching some of the foundational stuff and trying to do it really well. And so far it's served me well.
The most versatile training tool ever created, a barbell. You can use it
Yeah.
for everything.
Yeah, and I love these questions too, because we talk about them all the time. Like, if you could only pick one exercise for the rest of your life, what would it be? Or like, if you only pick one upper body, like the what if scenarios where it's fun, but like, or like if you only pick one implement, and we always go back and forth with like, the follow up question is always like, well, what's the context, right? Like, we want to know, because like, do I get the barbell with a full set of like bumper plates, or is it just the barbell? Because that changes things, right? Like, but yeah.
Right. Your biggest programming mistakes.
The big ones for me would be too much volume, getting stuck in the sagittal plane, and trying to cram too much in.
I'm sorry, that last one?
Trying to cram too much into the program.
Got it. Too much complexity.
Which I have certainly been guilty of in the past, and arguably may still, but it's a evolving process.
Group of athletes you most enjoyed working with.
That's tough. I've enjoyed all of the groups that I've worked with for different reasons.
Come on, make a choice.
I really enjoyed working at the major league level for like just really, helping fine tune really specialized athletes. And a lot of it was like a puzzle of like keeping them healthy, keeping them going, trying to improve their performance and all that. So I'll go with that.
Best total body lift.
I'll say a deadlift.
Best lower body press.
I'm a big fan of Bulgarian split squats or rear foot elevated split squat.
Not too complicated?
Nope.
Okay. I'm not going to argue about deadlifts.
I'm trying to keep my answers succinct.
Best lower body pull. Since you already blew it on the deadlift, you got to come up with another one.
RDL.
Almost two for one, but I'll give it to you.
All right.
Total body lift, deadlift. That's just a barbell deadlift or trap bar.
Do I have to pick?
Yeah.
Sure. With the population I work with right now, we primarily use trap bar. So I'll say a trap bar deadlift for total body. If we're talking about a hinge movement or a lower body pull, I'll say a barbell RDL.
Got it. Best upper body press.
Dumbbell bench.
Dumbbell bench? Why? Why that over the regular bench press?
Because I think you can vary the angles a little bit more. Also, from a depth perspective, you can get essentially a deeper stretch or arguably a greater range of motion.
Yeah, but what if you got some monster and the 100-pound dumbbells in the gym are too light? I think I've done dumbbell bench presses with like 75s before, and I'm like 5'4".
I haven't come across that issue very much.
I find the dumbbell deadlift or bench press one of the most dangerous exercises in the gym. You know why?
People dropping it on people's toes.
They drop it on the set of dumbbells they used before and didn't move.
Yeah.
So instead of bringing it up, they smashed their finger.
Yeah, it bounces off.
Only time I had to take an athlete to the hospital. I told him, move your thumb. He didn't.
Yeah.
Best upper body pull.
I love a single arm dumbbell row.
Most overrated exercise or lift.
I'll say anything that when they put a mini band around the knees for a bilateral movement, usually seen with a barbell glute bridge or some kind of glute bridge variation.
Okay, so mini band.
Can't stand it.
This is like women working on their bubble butts. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, or anything.
Well, I would explain why if you want me to, but I want to keep it lightning round.
Okay, that's good. Most underrated exercise or lift.
I'm going to go with a cable core rotation, which for me is, using, it could be a band or a cable column with the arms extended out like you would with a Palloff press and rotating through the transverse plane, or any kind of transverse plane trunk movement. I just think people's rib cages and pretty rigid and don't move well, and usually those planes are where we are most susceptible to injury.
Yeah, I've been doing some experimenting with we call it a standing Russian twist, but pretty much just a landmine,
Yeah,
thing, kind of.
similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and we before I'd always just prescribe the load, but I've been doing experimentation just with the hardly doable load, so just increase the load as hardly doable. It's amazing how heavy some guys can get with that.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty interesting. Most overrated piece of exercise equipment.
Glute ham developer, the old GHD. Which doesn't mean I'm against it too. That's why I hate these questions. It's so hard with these questions. It's like I still like them, but if I had to say overrated, like
Nordic hamstrings, man.
yeah,
Less
that's it.
easier, same work.
Yeah.
Most underrated.
Yeah, I'll say like a cable column. Pretty versatile. If you got one of those, there's a lot of options.
You say we're cheaper. Expensive. Your favorite mode of work capacity? Your work capacity event.
Yeah, we use like a mixed modal approach a lot here. So that's kind of the way that we approach improving work capacity.
Any event in particular?
No, usually what we'll do is pick a number of exercises or implements or whatever we want to select, and then try to approach it from like an energy system standpoint of like, okay, what are we trying to focus on here? And then that kind of guides our work rest ratios and take it from there.
Be specific. Give me.
Okay, so like an example would be maybe if I'm trying to work like more on like the anaerobic alactic end, we may have the work maybe 10 seconds or maybe even less than that. And then the rest can vary, of course. But let's say then they're off for 1 minute, and that could be sprints on an assault bike or an echo bike. Or if you used a more of a mixed modal approach, maybe there's the assault bike and kettlebell swings, or you could sub maybe a power clean in there and some kind of plyometric like a box jump and going through that.
I do remember that from my athletes' performance days. They like the set rest period stuff. And advice to your 18-year-old self.
My advice to my 18-year-old self would be network more often early in your career.
What is networking?
For me, it's connecting with individuals in your field or outside of your field that can have a mutually beneficial relationship. So for me, I'm typically I would shy away from putting myself out on a limb and introducing myself to people. And as I got further into my career, I realized the power and the value of your network and your people and the people that know you and what you're capable of as far as career opportunities, and certainly from an educational standpoint of your own development, is learning or being inquisitive about what other people know, and then maybe exploring that yourself is the best way that I've found to continue to grow.
Very good. Is there any question about your career or work that I should have asked but didn't?
Man, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot. It was a great conversation. And thoroughly enjoyed it.
Mike, thanks so much for taking the time today. What an interesting career.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good luck down there, Aurora. I've worked quite a bit with the Denver Fire Department, worked with guys down in Colorado Springs, and of course lots of individual athletes in both those cities and areas. One of my best friends and another coach is Dave Hageman. He's up at he's lieutenant or assistant chief now at DFD, and he's a pretty incredible strength conditioning coach himself.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to meet him once.
Oh yeah. He's a great guy. He's knowledgeable too. I think his daughter was a national champion Olympic weightlifter as a junior. Son's going to Air Force Academy to play football. He played at military. He was a West Point grad, so he's been around.
Yeah. Well, we're close enough. Hopefully, if you're ever down here, please hit me up and grab coffee or something.
Well, thanks so much, Michael.
All right, thank you.